In this video, I'll be showing you how to build 10 different Minecraft path designs. While showing you how to build them, I also want to talk about my build process and some of my ideas behind each design. I hope you find this video helpful and that it gives you some inspiration for your Minecraft worlds. And I'm really curious to know which design is your favorite, so be sure to let me know in the comments. You're currently watching me build my natural themed path. I made this one about 4 blocks wide, and to make it a little bit more interesting, I just added a slight curve to it. The path itself is made mostly out of coarse dirt, but I also mixed in some rooted dirt just for some texture and color variation. Now's the fun part where we can add a bunch of different details, so I added some boulders using mossy and regular cobblestone, and then I also added some vegetation in the form of leaves, grass, and flowers. I made a small little bench using extinguished campfires, and then to light the path up, I'm just going to build a simple lamppost design, which I think really ties this path together. This will also stop mobs from spawning, which is definitely a benefit in a survival world. Next up is a city-inspired path. This one is going to be pretty big, so each section is going to be 7 blocks wide and 19 blocks across. Once the area is dug out, just replace the 3 middle blocks with a row of bricks. I figured bricks are a pretty good block for a city path since it's going to have a lot of traffic on it and it needs to be made out of a strong material. I added 3 wide granite sections on both sides, spaced 5 blocks apart. In the middle of those, I added a chiseled stone brick, and then I'm going to wrap the entire path using stone brick stairs. I love how the stairs give some depth to the path, but you still don't fall in because it's only half a block wide. I'm filling the remaining sections using moss blocks, and then I'm going to plant some sweet berry bushes to add some vegetation and color to our path. I'm going to add a couple of lampposts, and I built these ones out of jungle wood and mud brick slabs, which I think matches our color palette perfectly. Next up is a lush path. For this one, I'm just going to start by turning the ground into some path blocks, just about 1 or 2 blocks wide. Then I'm going to simply surround the entire path using moss blocks. I really like how this helps highlight the actual path itself and divide it from the surrounding area. I'm also adding a small little patch of coarse dirt, and you'll see why in just a few seconds, but before we get to that, let's surround our entire path with a bunch of flowers. I'm using a lot of the pink petals that were introduced with the cherry blossom biome, and then I'm also just going to mix in some of the lilacs, as well as oxeye daisies. I feel like these flowers all really work well together. Just like I did with the natural path, I'm going to add a small bench using extinguished campfires. As for this dirt patch, I'm going to add a couple of beehives sitting on some scaffolding. I had the fun idea of adding a sign to the side of the path so that players can know where the path is leading to. I used some hanging signs and I put some arrows on them, and I also used some glow squid ink to make them a bit more visible. To finish off this path, I'm going to surround it with some moss carpet, and I really like how this makes the path blocks look a little bit more countersunk than they actually are. For this next path, I went for a Deepslate inspired theme. I'm starting off by digging out the footprint for the path, and I made this one about 4 blocks wide and also added a bit of a curve. And then I'm just going to simply fill in the entire thing using Deepslate. For some texture variation and to make this look a little bit less flat, I'm mixing in some smooth basalt as well as polished basalt. I'm also going to mix in a little bit of cobblestone, but I'm just doing this very sparingly, otherwise I think this path will get really messy. For some color variation, I'm just going to add some small patches of rooted dirt surrounding the path. I really like how this helps separate the path from the surrounding area. It's sort of like a border surrounding the path. I'm also going to mix in some of the regular moss blocks as well as moss carpet to just help blend the entire path together. And to further blend it, I'm also going to use some glow lichen, which also gives the added benefit of lighting up the path. To finish this one off, I'm just going to add some vegetation, and I did this in the form of flowering azalea bushes, dark oak saplings, and ferns. For this next one, I went for a desert-inspired path. Just like most of our other ones, I'm starting off by digging out about a 4 wide area for our path. And I'm going to fill this one in using sand. For some texture variation, I'm adding some birch slabs surrounding the outside of our path. Make sure you use slabs as we're going to be waterlogging some of these later on. I'm going to use what I'd kind of consider a hidden texture in the game. I'm using red mushroom blocks, which look kind of weird at first, but when we add another block on top and then remove it, it exposes the inside of the mushroom, and this texture works perfectly in combination with the rest of our blocks. Since we used birch slabs, we can waterlog them and then add sugarcane to the surrounding sand. And if you want to control the heights of the sugarcane, just add a string on top, which will stop it from growing. For a few extra details, I'm just adding some oak leaves as well as some dead bushes, which I think really tie this whole path together. Next up is a stone path. I'm starting off by digging out the footprint for the path, and I made this one about 4 to 5 blocks wide. The main block that I'm going to be using is cobblestone, so I'm just filling in the entire footprint. It's obviously looking pretty flat at this point, so I'm mixing in some mossy cobblestone for some texture variation. I also like how this makes the path look a little bit more weathered and worn down. And for even a bit more variation, I also mixed in some andesite. On the outside edge of the path, I'm adding some small little patches of podzol, and from there I want to add some boulders surrounding our path, and I'm mainly doing this with stairs and slabs, but I also use some acacia logs, which I think look kind of cool as this stone block. For some final details, I'm adding some ferns, as well as some buttons on the path to look like small little stones. I made the next path in a super cool rustic theme. The footprint for this one is again about 4 blocks wide, and I'm gonna fill this one in using packed mud. This has been one of my favorite blocks to use for paths ever since it was introduced into the game. For some texture variation, I'm also mixing in some of the mud bricks, which I think also give the added benefit of making the path look a little bit more permanent and put together. And for even more texture and color variation, I'm also mixing in some coarse dirt, which is also going to allow us to place some vegetation inside of the path later on. I had the fun idea of adding a small campsite to the side of our path, so I'm adding a larger dirt section so that we can build that later on. To break up the texture of the coarse dirt, I also just mixed in a bit of the rooted dirt. From there, I added some moss carpet surrounding the path, as well as some grass just to add some vegetation. I added some hay bales to really emphasize that rustic theme, and I really love how this gives the path a pop of color. Moving on to that campsite that I was talking about, I added some horizontal logs, a campfire, as well as a lantern and a flower pot just for some final details. For this next path, I decided to go for a Nether theme. I kept this one a little bit thinner than the others, making the path only 3 to sometimes 4 blocks wide. On the edges of the path, I'm adding some small patches of black stone, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the path using soul soil. Unlike soul sand, this won't slow you down, and also if you have soul speed, you can go super fast on this path, which is definitely a nice benefit. I added some black stone bricks for some texture variation. For a nice pop of color, I'm adding a bunch of the crimson and warped nelium. To give this path some life, I'm adding a bunch of the roots and fungus in both the warped and crimson variety. To finish this one off, I'm just going to mix in a little bit of rooted dirt. I feel like this path would work perfect in the Nether or for a fantasy themed build. For this next one, I'm going for a colorful Greek theme. I'm starting off by digging out a 5 wide area for our path, and then I'm replacing the 3 middle blocks with smooth quartz. And for some texture variation, I'm mixing in some white concrete powder. To make a really colorful border around our path, I'm using orange glazed terracotta, and I'm just facing them into each other to make a circle pattern. Feel free to experiment with any of the other colors of glazed terracotta, as there's a lot of fun textures out there. For our 10th and final path, I decided to go for a modern theme. I started off by digging out a 3 wide area, and then I filled it in with stone bricks. I want to add a border to our path, so I'm digging out a row of blocks on either side. From there, I placed blocks of andesite spaced 3 blocks apart, and then I'm going to simply fill in the rest of the area with smooth stone. Above the polished andesite, I'm adding brick walls, and then in between those, I'm placing mangrove gates, which creates this really cool arch design. For some texture variation, I'm mixing in a bit of the regular stone into the stone bricks. For some greenery, I added some small trees made out of oak fences and flowering azalea leaves. For a final detail, I added some lampposts made out of spruce wood in between the trees. This will help light up our path. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful and that it gave you some ideas for your Minecraft world. As always, a super special thank you to my supporters on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing so that you don't miss my next tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and happy building!